Greenland looks like a clean white shape at the top of the world, quiet, harmless, almost empty. But most of this island is not land at all. It's ice, an immense shield that covers the interior like a frozen continent, thick enough in places to bury mountains and crush time itself. Along the coasts, the ice doesn't just sit there. It moves. It cracks. It calves into the sea with a sound like distant thunder, releasing blue giants that drift south like slow warnings. So what carved Greenland into a labyrinth of fjords and cliffs? And how did people learn to truly live on the edge of a moving world? To understand Greenland, the story has to begin beneath the ice, beneath the silence, down to rock that is older than almost anything visible on Earth. Parts of Greenland's bedrock belong to ancient continental cores, the kind of deep, stubborn stone that has survived eons of pressure, heat, and collision. This is not a young land sculpted by a single dramatic event. It is an ancient foundation that has been rewritten again and again by the slowest forces imaginable. Then the great editor arrived, ice. During the repeated ice ages of the last few million years, especially the most recent glacial cycles, Greenland became the workshop of glaciers. Snow fell. It piled up. It compacted into ice. And as the weight grew, the island's interior turned into an elevated dome of frozen mass, a high plateau of moving ice that behaves less like a static blanket and more like a living system. Gravity pulls it outward in all directions. Year after year, it creeps toward the coast, feeding outlet glaciers that funnel through valleys like white rivers made of stone. That movement is what carved Greenland's shoreline into a jagged maze. Along the edges, glaciers acted like slow blades. They scraped, plucked, and gouged the bedrock, grinding mountains down and digging valleys deeper than rivers ever could. When the climate warmed and the sea returned, those U-shaped valleys flooded. The result is the Greenland coastline fjords that slice far inland cliffs that rise like fortress walls and narrow channels where the ocean feels trapped between rock and ice. In places such as Ilulissat Icefjord, the process feels almost immediate, like watching geology happen in real time. An outlet glacier delivers ice toward the water. The front fractures, and enormous blocks detach and tilt into the sea. The sound can travel across the fjord like thunder under a low sky. What looks like calm, drifting ice is actually the surface of a dynamic conveyor belt, freshly born icebergs nudged by currents and wind rotating slowly as if the ocean is testing their balance. Greenland's climate sharpens these shapes. The interior is often described as a polar desert, not because it is warm, but because it is dry. Cold air holds little moisture, and much of the island's snowfall arrives as fine, persistent accumulation rather than heavy storms. Along the coasts, it's different. Here, weather systems from the North Atlantic collide with Arctic air, and the island becomes a stage for sudden shifts. Fog that erases distant snow, that arrives sideways, and winds that can sound like an engine running in the dark. One wind matters more than most: the katabatic wind. Cold, dense air forms over the ice sheet and slides downhill under its own weight. It can pour into fjords and settlements with little warning, turning a quiet shoreline into a corridor of force. It is one of Greenland's signatures, the island breathing cold air outward as if the ice itself exhales. Yet, Greenland is not uniformly frozen in the same way everywhere all the time. Summer brings a different kind of drama melting. On warmer days, the ice sheet surface can darken with water-forming streams and temporary lakes that sparkle under the sun. Some of that water disappears into vertical shafts, moulins plunging down through the ice. It is a startling image: liquid water cutting through solid ice, delivering heat and pressure to the base, sometimes helping glaciers slide faster toward the sea. The land is still being shaped not only by ancient grinding, but by present-day physics. The island's topography also tells a quieter story about weight. Ice is heavy, so heavy that over long periods it can push the crust downward. When glaciers retreat, the land can slowly rise again, a process called rebound. It doesn't feel like movement to a human lifespan, but it is a reminder that Greenland is not just a landscape. It is a balance between mass and crust, between pressure and release. There are also the mountains that refuse to be buried, Nunatak's peaks that pierce through the ice like dark islands in a white ocean. They look almost defiant. They expose the truth that Greenland's ice is not an absolute cover, but a temporary dominion, powerful, yes, but still subject to the planet's shifting temperature and winds. And then there is light, because in Greenland, light behaves like a geological force of its own. In winter, the sun can vanish for weeks or months, depending on latitude, turning the world into a long twilight. In summer, the opposite happens. Daylight stretches into night, and the horizon never truly closes. Under that endless sun, the ice can glitter, but it can also soften. The same phenomenon that makes Greenland breathtaking on camera, the low-angle gold light, the midnight glow, also accelerates the delicate seasonal melt that feeds rivers, fjords, and the slow migration of ice toward the sea. So Greenland's formation is not a finished chapter. It is ongoing. The island is an ancient rock body wearing a modern shifting cloak. Its fjords are scars and corridors, at once evidence of what ice did and pathways for what ice is still doing. If the ice sheet is always moving, always adjusting, what does stable ground even mean at the edge of the world? At first glance, Greenland can look like a place where life forgot to arrive. Ice dominates the map. Rock and snow dominate the horizon. And yet, life is everywhere, threaded through narrow windows of possibility, surviving on timing, migration, and instinct refined by centuries of cold. The secret is that Greenland is not one ecosystem. It is a mosaic built around edges. Along the coast, where the ice sheet retreats and bare ground appears, tundra takes over. In summer, it can feel almost impossible after months of darkness and frost. The land suddenly wakes up. Mosses and lichens, ancient patient organisms, spread over stones like soft paint. Hardy shrubs hug the ground, staying low to avoid the wind. Tiny flowers bloom quickly, as if they know the season is too short for hesitation. Even the air changes. It carries a faint scent of wet earth and salt, a reminder that soil exists here, thin as it may be. But the real engine of Greenland's biodiversity is not on land. It is in the cold ocean. Greenland sits where Arctic and North Atlantic systems meet, and that boundary creates productivity. Sea ice forms, breaks reforms. Currents move nutrients. In certain seasons, the waters can explode with microscopic life plankton blooms that become the foundation for everything else. When you watch a whale surface in Greenland's waters, you are seeing the top of a food pyramid built on invisible chemistry and sunlight. In the sea, survival is a choreography. Seals depend on breathing holes and shifting ice. Fish follow temperature bands and currents. Whales arrive like traveling continents, humpbacks, fin whales, and others moving in seasonal patterns that turn fjords into feeding grounds. Their presence changes the atmosphere of a place instantly. A calm bay becomes a stage. One exhale, one fin, one slow roll. And suddenly, the cold feels alive. On land, the icons are fewer, but their stories are sharper. The polar bear is the symbol everyone expects, but it is not simply a big predator. It is an animal built for a specific world sea ice. Its hunting strategy, its travel routes, its timing. Everything leans on the existence of ice as a platform. Without that platform, even the most powerful body becomes limited. In Greenland, that fact adds tension to every sighting. The bear is not just impressive. It is a question walking on 4 feet. What happens when the floor disappears? The Arctic fox tells a different story. Less about dominance, more about flexibility. It can shift diet depending on season. It can endure the dark months by relying on opportunism and memory of the land. In winter, its fur turns pale, blurring it into snow. In summer, it darkens. It's not just camouflage. It's a way of belonging to a world that changes color twice a year. Caribou, or reindeer, depending on context, move through Greenland's open landscapes like living weather. Their migration routes are not random. They are responses to vegetation, snow depth predators, and human presence. When a herd passes, it compresses time. Suddenly, you are watching an ancient pattern continue, as if the last 1,000 years were only a few steps. And above them, the birds stitch Greenland into the rest of the planet. In summer, seabirds crowd cliffs and islands, turning quiet rock into noisy cities. Guillemots, kittiwakes, and other species nest in dense colonies where every ledge matters. Their wings carry them to feeding grounds far out at sea, then back again to the same rock faces year after year. For Greenland, these birds are proof that edge of the world is not isolation, it is intersection. The island is a waypoint in global migration. But Greenland's biodiversity isn't just about charismatic animals. Some of the most important life here is easy to miss. In the tundra, lichens and mosses are more than decoration. They stabilize soil. They hold moisture. They create microhabitats that allow insects and tiny invertebrates to exist. And those insects, briefly abundant in summer, become fuel for birds and fish. Life here is a chain of small dependencies that must align perfectly. Even the ice itself can host life. In certain conditions, algae can live on the surface of snow, and ice darkening it slightly. That darkening matters. It can increase absorption of sunlight, subtly encouraging more melt. In Greenland, biology and physics touch each other in surprising ways. The color of life can change the behavior of ice. Then, there is the soundscape, the part of ecology most documentaries forget to describe, even though it is what makes a place feel real. On a still day, the tundra can be almost silent, broken only by distant water, trickling through melt channels. Then the wind rises and everything changes. The wind is not background noise in Greenland. It is a character. It carries ocean salt inland. It pushes fog through valleys. It shapes how animals travel and how humans plan. And when the sea ice shifts, you can sometimes hear the cracking, sharp sudden like the island, speaking in a language made of pressure. This is why Greenland's ecosystems feel both resilient and fragile at the same time. Resilient because life here has adapted to extremes, cold darkness, short summers, limited vegetation. Fragile because the margin for error is small. A slight change in timing, when ice forms, when melt begins, when plankton blooms, peak, can ripple through the whole system. Climate change in Greenland is not an abstract concept. It shows up in the ecology as mismatch. If sea ice forms later or breaks earlier, seals may lose stable platforms. Polar bears may be forced to swim longer distances or shift toward land-based food that cannot fully replace their usual hunting. If plankton blooms shift in timing, fish populations can change, and the whales that follow them may alter routes. Even the tundra responds longer. Growing seasons can allow shrubs to expand, changing habitat for birds and small mammals. Every adjustment rewrites another paragraph in the ecological story. And yet there is still wonder here that cannot be reduced to graphs. A whale breathing in a fjord at midnight sunlight still on the water. A fox pausing on a ridge listening. A cliff packed with birds, the air vibrating with wings. A line of meltwater reflecting the sky like a knife of glass on white snow. Greenland teaches a specific lesson about life. It doesn't need comfort to exist. It needs patterns. It needs balance. It needs time. So the question becomes, when the seasons themselves begin to shift, when the old patterns no longer arrive on schedule, what happens to a place where survival has always depended on perfect timing? Long before Greenland became a symbol on modern maps, it was already a test one that only certain kinds of human knowledge could pass. This island did not reward arrogance. It rewarded attention, the ability to read clouds like warnings, to read snow like memory, to read the sea ice like a living, shifting road that could carry a traveler safely, or swallow them without drama. The first humans who settled in and around Greenland's vast Arctic environment arrived in waves over long stretches of time, moving through northern corridors when climate and ice conditions allowed. Their survival depended on something more important than strength, a relationship with the landscape that was practical, intimate, and constantly renegotiated. In Greenland, the Arctic is not a backdrop. It is the main character. And the people who built lives here, Kalaallit, the Greenlandic Inuit, learned to live inside the Arctic's rules without pretending they could control it. Kalaallit culture, in its deepest roots, was shaped by the rhythm of movement. Seasons determined routes. Ice determined speed. Animals determined timing. A settlement was never just a point on land. It was a strategy. In winter, when darkness lengthened and storms erased the horizon, community tightened. Knowledge became communal property passed through stories, demonstration, and repetition. How to build shelter fast, how to conserve heat, how to hunt without wasting energy, how to interpret the smallest details, wind direction, snow texture, the behavior of dogs, because those details were often the difference between returning home and never returning at all. The sea was both pantry and highway. Along coastal Greenland, hunting was not simply an activity. It was a system of survival, built on respect, skill, and restraint. Seals were vital, providing meat, fat, and materials. In a place where wood is scarce, every usable resource mattered. The logic was simple, but unforgiving. Nothing could be wasted, because waste was a luxury Greenland never offered. And yet this was not a life defined only by hardship. It also carried beauty, especially in the way it insisted that humans were not separate from nature, but inside it. In traditional worldviews across the Arctic, the environment is not dead. It has intention. It responds. It remembers. The sea is not merely water. It is a presence. Animals are not just prey. They are participants in a moral relationship. The act of hunting, therefore, becomes more than extraction. It becomes a practice of humility, because the hunter depends on the world's permission as much as on the hunter's skill. This attitude shaped behavior in ways that outsiders often misunderstood. Where modern industrial logic might see efficiency, Arctic culture often sees balance. Where a stranger might see emptiness, Kalaallit families saw roots, patterns, and invisible borders. Even the ice had geography-safe ridges, unstable pressure lines, thin spots near currents areas that sounded wrong underfoot. In this way, Greenland's earliest cultural foundation was built from what might be called ice literacy. Children learned it by watching. Adults refined it by surviving. elders carried it like a library, and the text changed every year. Technology in early Greenlandic life was never about convenience. It was about possibility. A kayak, for example, is not just a boat. It is a philosophy light enough to move quickly, quiet enough to approach animals, resilient enough to handle cold water, that allows little margin for mistakes. A harpoon is not just a weapon. It is a design solution for a world where retrieving a hunted animal matters as much as striking it. Clothing is not fashion. It is life support built layer by layer, tested in wind, that can cut through careless fabric like a blade. And then there were dogs. In Greenland, dogs were not pets. They were partners. They expanded a human's reach across ice and snow. They made winter travel possible. They also required their own care food training understanding. The relationship was practical, but it could also be deeply emotional because both human and animal depended on each other in the same harsh environment. A dog team was a moving community, a small society traveling over a frozen ocean. Ilulissat society also carried an advanced understanding of risk, because risk was constant. A hunt could end in success, or it could end in sudden fog, shifting ice and disorientation. A storm could arrive quickly. The sea could change mood. And in the Arctic, small errors do not stay small. A wet boot, a wrong turn, a delayed return, each could spiral into danger. So Greenland's early communities developed a culture where cooperation was not a moral slogan. It was a survival strategy. Sharing food mattered. So did sharing information. And so did sharing responsibility. This is where storytelling becomes more than entertainment. In Greenland's oral traditions, stories carried maps that were not drawn. They carried lessons about dangerous places, about the behavior of animals, about past winters that went wrong. They taught patience. They taught respect. They also taught identity, who belonged to which coastline, which hunting ground, which family line. In a landscape where written signs can vanish under a single snowfall, memory becomes infrastructure. There is also an emotional truth that often goes unspoken in places like Greenland. The environment shapes not only what people do, but how they feel. Long darkness can deepen introspection. Endless daylight can blur time. The Arctic creates a psychological landscape where humans learn to live with quiet, with waiting, with sudden bursts of action. That emotional training becomes cultural character calm under pressure, humor in hardship endurance that looks ordinary because it has to be. And then there is the question of arrival and contact. When outsiders came through exploration trade, religion, and later political administration, Greenland's early culture did not simply disappear. It adapted, negotiated, resisted, absorbed, and transformed. But before those later chapters, the foundation remained clear. Kalaallit identity grew from a relationship with ice and sea that demanded intelligence, humility, and community. To speak about Greenland's early human story without romanticizing it, one detail matters. This was never a life of endless abundance. It was a life of careful calculation. When hunting was good, it brought relief and a brief sense of security. When hunting was poor, it forced hard choices. People had to know when to move, when to wait, when to turn back. They had to understand the difference between courage and recklessness. The Arctic punished the second. And still, families persisted. Communities formed. Children grew up with the same horizon. Their grandparents knew a horizon where land and sea blur into white, where weather can erase certainty, where the world feels bigger than human plans. That persistence is the heart of Greenland's early culture. Kalaallit life was not built on conquering nature. It was built on belonging to it, while never forgetting that nature was stronger. This is why the island's human story is inseparable from the island's physical story. The fjords and mountains may look eternal, but the real tradition here has always been movement, following seasons, following animals, following the narrow corridors where survival is possible. And now, with the Arctic changing faster than many places on Earth, that ancient knowledge becomes even more precious, not as a museum piece, but as a living way of seeing. If the ice road shifts, if the timing of animals changes, if the sea behaves differently year after year, what happens to a culture whose wisdom is written in patterns the world no longer keeps? For centuries, Greenland lived in the space between rumor and reality. Sailors spoke of ice walls and phantom coastlines. Traders imagined wealth hidden at the edge of the North Atlantic. Priests and kings looked at the map and saw a frontier, an empty blank that could be filled with flags and names. But Greenland was never blank. It was simply hard to reach, harder to stay, and almost impossible to control. The early Norse arrival is often framed like a legend, but it begins with something very human: ambition, mixed with desperation. In the late 10th century, Norse settlers reached Greenland and built communities along the southwestern coast, where the climate, at least for a time, offered a fragile margin for farming and livestock. They raised animals, built turf and stone homes, and tried to recreate a familiar European order on unfamiliar ground. Greenland to them was both refuge and gamble. For a while, the gamble worked. Then the climate shifted. Seasons grew harsher. Sea routes became less reliable. The ice tightened its grip. Greenland's margin narrowed. And slowly, without a single dramatic collapse, the Norse settlements faded from history. Their disappearance remains one of Greenland's haunting themes, not a story of instant disaster, but of gradual pressure isolation and a landscape that simply stopped granting permission. Kalaalleq communities, however, did not vanish. Their survival strategy was different. It did not depend on fields and imported expectations. It depended on adaptation, seasonal mobility, and deep knowledge of the sea's rhythms. Two worlds existed in the same Arctic, responding to the same cold, and Greenland quietly revealed which strategy could bend without breaking. Later centuries brought new waves of contact trade mission work and administration, each one transforming Greenland's coastlines into channels of exchange. Whaling and hunting for furs drew outsiders into Arctic waters not out of admiration for the landscape, but out of hunger for profit. The North Atlantic became a corridor where Greenland was no longer just an endpoint. It was a stop in a wider economic machine. This is where the historical story becomes more complicated and more intimate. As settlements grew into towns, Greenland's coastline began to collect infrastructure, small harbors, warehouses, churches, administrative buildings. Nuuk would become the island's political and cultural center, while other towns developed as nodes tied to fishing, hunting, and coastal logistics. Yet even as development arrived, Greenland remained geographically stubborn. The interior ice sheet still blocked roads. The mountains still fractured the land. The sea still controlled movement. Towns became islands of human structure, separated by wilderness, connected more by boats and aircraft than by any continuous roadway. Greenland's economy over time found its strongest anchor in the ocean. Fishing, especially for cold water species, became a backbone that could support modern communities. It created jobs, shaped diets, and determined which towns grew and which struggled. It also tied Greenland tightly to global markets, where prices and demand could change faster than any storm. In a place where nature already dominates daily life, economic volatility adds a second kind of weather, unpredictable, sometimes cruel, and impossible to negotiate with. Then comes the era that redefines Greenland's place in the modern imagination, the scientific and strategic age. Greenland is not only a landscape, it is a location. In the 20th century, its position between North America and Europe turned it into a strategic outpost, especially as aviation and global conflict made the Arctic suddenly relevant. Weather stations, runways, and military infrastructure appeared in places that had once been reached only by boats and sleds. Greenland's skies became pathways. Its coast became staging points. The edge of the world became paradoxically a crossroads. At the same time, science began to treat Greenland as a vault. The ice sheet holds records layers of snowfall compacted into pages of climate history. Researchers drilled cores, studied chemistry, and read the atmosphere of ancient centuries trapped in ice. This work did not only produce data, it produced a new narrative: Greenland as the planet's memory, a place where the past is preserved with terrifying clarity. And then the present began to change fast enough to feel visible. In some coastal regions, glaciers that once seemed permanent began to retreat. Melt seasons lengthened. Ice dynamics became headline material. Places like Ilulissat turned into symbols of both wonder and warning, where tourists come for the spectacle of icebergs, and scientists come to measure the pace of change. Tourism grew, and with it came a new kind of economy, one based on awe. ships slide into fjords like moving hotels. Visitors step onto rock and ice for a few hours, taking photographs of a world that looks untouched, while local communities negotiate what it means to be watched. For some towns, tourism brings income and opportunity. For others, it creates pressure, crowded docks, cultural commodification, rising costs, and a quiet fear that the story being sold to outsiders is simpler than the life being lived at home. Greenland's development is therefore not a straight line from traditional to modern. It is a braided river, multiple currents of identity and history, flowing side by side, sometimes merging, sometimes pulling apart. Kalaalleq culture did not end when modern institutions arrived. It transformed. Language, art, music, and storytelling continued, sometimes resisting, sometimes evolving, sometimes finding new forms. Modern Greenland carries both snowmobile tracks and ancient roots of seasonal movement. It carries schools and satellites and social media while still living under wind that can cancel plans in an instant. This complexity is visible in the built environment. Many Greenlandic towns are painted in bright colors, not as decoration alone, but as clarity against long winters and white landscapes. Houses cling to rock where soil is thin. Harbors become lifelines. And beyond the last building, the land returns to silence. In recent decades, Greenland's development story has gained a new layer, resources, and global attention. Interest in mineral shipping routes and the broader Arctic's changing accessibility has pulled Greenland into international conversations that can feel far removed from daily life in small coastal communities. Decisions made in distant capitals, market shifts thousands of kilometers away, and climate trends measured in decimals can suddenly land on Greenland's shore as real consequences, jobs created, or lost landscapes, debated futures proposed. And all of it happens under the shadow of ice. Because Greenland's history keeps returning to the same truth. The environment is not just context, it is governance. It sets the rules, it enforces the rules, and it doesn't negotiate. A new industry may arrive, but it will still depend on sea conditions. A new road may be planned, but the terrain may refuse it. A new building may rise, but the permafrost and storms will decide how long it lasts. This makes Greenland's historical arc feel different from many places. In most narratives of progress, humans push outward and reshape the land. In Greenland, the land reshapes the human plan, sometimes gently, sometimes violently, often without emotion. The fjords and ice do not care what century it is. And yet human life persists, because Greenland's communities have always lived with uncertainty as normal. That is the hidden continuity between the earliest Inuit knowledge and modern Greenlandic resilience. The tools change, the connectivity changes, the politics changes, but the core skill remains adaptation. Greenland's historical journey is at its heart a story about living in a place that never promised permanence. Norse farms learned that lesson the hard way. Coastal towns learn it when storms cut supply lines. Modern planners learn it when geography turns every project into a negotiation with ice rock and distance. And Kalalit families have lived it for generations, reading the world as it changes, not as they wish it would stay. So the island carries layers: ancient rock, ancient ice, ancient knowledge, and modern ambition, stacked on top of each other, sometimes aligned, sometimes in conflict. And as Greenland steps further into the global spotlight, one question becomes unavoidable. When the world's attention grows louder and the Arctic itself grows less predictable, can Greenland shape its own future? Or will history keep being written by forces arriving from the outside? Modern Greenland lives inside a contradiction. From far away, it looks like the last untouched frontier, icebergs drifting in perfect silence, mountains rising from frozen bays, small towns painted bright against endless white. But up close, Greenland is not a museum of nature. It is a home. And like any home, it has bills, debates, dreams, and pressure points that don't always fit the postcard. The biggest pressure point is also the most visible warming. In Greenland, climate change doesn't arrive politely. It arrives as a rearrangement of timing. The sea ice that once formed like a reliable calendar may come later, thinner, less stable. Winter travel routes can become uncertain. Hunting patterns shift. Storms feel different. And the melt season, once a brief window, can stretch longer, making the ice sheet not just a backdrop, but an active headline. For scientists, Greenland is one of the world's most watched places because its ice is tied to global sea level. For Greenlanders, the issue is more intimate. The ice is tied to daily life identity and safety. When elders say the ice used to behave differently, it isn't nostalgia. It's field knowledge, the the kind built from decades of reading a living landscape. This shift forces a new kind of decision-making. Communities have always adapted to weather, but now adaptation has to account for trends, not just storms. That means investing in new infrastructure, adjusting hunting and fishing strategies, rethinking travel safety, and planning for futures that no longer look like the past. At the same time, Greenland faces economic reality. Many towns rely heavily on marine industries, especially fishing and processing. It provides jobs, it structures the year, and it anchors community life. But dependence can also be vulnerability. Global markets move fast. Regulations change. Ocean temperatures and ecosystems shift. A place that already lives at the mercy of nature can suddenly find itself at the mercy of prices too. This is where tourism enters both as opportunity and as tension. Tourism in Greenland is often sold as last chance travel, see the ice before it changes. That marketing can be uncomfortable, even painful, because it turns Greenland's uncertainty into a product. And yet tourism can bring income, entrepreneurship, and connection. Local guides share expertise. Small businesses grow. Cultural events gain wider audiences. A visitor, if respectful, can become an ally who leaves with more understanding than they arrived with. But tourism also brings friction. Large ships can overwhelm small ports. Short visits can reduce communities to scenery. And there is a quiet fear that the world is coming not to learn Greenland, but to consume it photos, awe souvenirs, then leave without seeing the deeper complexity. The modern cultural life of Greenland is built exactly in this space between exposure and protection. Language is a strong thread. Greenlandic Ilulissat remains central to identity-carrying concepts shaped by sea ice and seasonal movement concepts that don't always translate cleanly into outside languages. Music, art, and storytelling continue, but they evolve traditional forms, meet modern instruments, ancestral themes, meet contemporary realities. Greenland's cultural expression is often less about nostalgia and more about negotiation, how to stay rooted while the world accelerates. This negotiation is also visible in education and youth culture. Young Greenlanders grow up connected to global media, global trends, global politics. They can be both fiercely local and confidently international. In small towns, that can create a sense of dual identity, belonging to a tight community where everyone knows each other, while also feeling pulled toward larger worlds of study work and opportunity. Then there is the debate that hovers over Greenland's future development. As Arctic attention grows, Greenland is increasingly discussed in terms of mineral shipping routes and strategic location. For some, resource development promises jobs and economic independence. For others, it threatens fragile ecosystems and cultural continuity. The question is not simple because the need for economic stability is real, and so is the cost of damaging a landscape that cannot easily recover. In Greenland, the land is not a silent commodity. It is a living archive of ice wildlife and meaning. To dig into it is not only an industrial act, it is a cultural act. And this is where modern Greenland reveals its most human challenge, deciding who gets to define progress. Is progress a new industry? Is it stronger, local services? Is it cultural preservation? Is it political autonomy? Is it the right to choose a path without being reduced to someone else's narrative, either as untouched paradise or resource frontier? At the community level, the questions become smaller and sharper. How do you build homes and roads when the ground is unstable and weather is extreme? How do you keep young people engaged and hopeful when opportunities feel distant? How do you welcome visitors without turning culture into a performance? How do you protect wildlife while still living from the sea? These questions don't have one heroic answer. They have daily answers, meetings, compromises, local initiatives, arguments, and long-term planning that rarely makes headlines. And still, Greenland's strength continues to show in its resilience culture, the habit of facing uncertainty without denial. That resilience is visible in the way towns function. Boats and small aircraft connect communities. Bright houses fight the winter's monotony. Harbors remain the heartbeat. Festivals and gatherings puncture the dark seasons with warmth and humor. People make art out of what they have. They laugh at weather that would terrify outsiders. And they keep telling stories because stories here are more than entertainment. They are survival tools for identity. Greenland today is not just ice melting. It is a society thinking out loud about its future while standing on shifting ground. And perhaps that is the most powerful image of all, a place that has always lived with extremes now becoming the world's clearest mirror, showing what happens when stable climates, stable economies, and stable assumptions start to loosen. So the final question isn't only about Greenland. It's about us. If the edge of the world is changing, and the people who know that edge best are forced to adapt, first, what responsibility do the rest of us carry, watching from safer coastlines? Greenland is often described as a world of white, but that description misses the truth. This island is not a blank page. It is a manuscript written in layers, ancient rock beneath, ancient ice above, and human knowledge moving between them like a heartbeat. It is a place where time is visible, where the past is trapped in frozen memory, and where the present is loud enough to crack the silence. To stand on a Greenlandic shoreline and watch ice drift out to sea is to witness more than beauty. It is to watch a process slow, immense, and consequential. Fjords, carved by glaciers, remind us that the earth can sculpt stone with patience. The tundra's brief blooms remind us that life can thrive without comfort. And Kalaallit communities remind us that survival is not only endurance, but relationship with land, with sea, with each other. And yet Greenland is also a warning shaped like a miracle. The Arctic is changing. The timing of ice, the balance of ecosystems, the patterns people have depended on, none of it is guaranteed to stay familiar. What happens here does not remain here. When Greenland's ice shifts, the ripple touches faraway coastlines, faraway cities, faraway futures. So what can be done without turning this place into a symbol and forgetting the people who call it home? It begins with attention that is honest. Travel if you come as a guest, not a consumer of last chance scenery. Learn the names, not just the views. Support local guides and local businesses that protect culture and land. Respect wildlife as part of a living system, not a photo opportunity. And listen especially to voices that have read this environment for generations. Beyond travel, there is the deeper responsibility to treat Greenland not as a distant spectacle, but as a shared mirror. The choices made far from the Arctic energy consumption policy indifference echo here with unusual clarity. Because the edge of the world is not only a line on a map, it is the place where consequences arrive first. And when you look at Greenland, it's ice like a sleeping continent, its fjords like scars, its communities holding steady against shifting seasons. One question lingers long after the screen fades to black. If the world's edges are changing, what will we choose to protect before the center begins to crumble too?